Yeah, I wanted to give you just a little a sense of where I was coming from in 1986 when my life changed. That was the year that my first big commercial success came out, Platoon, and also Salvador. In that year, I first got into this mess that I'm in Havana, Cuba. And I remember vividly, Mr. Castro was very kind because he loved Salvador, the film I had made. And I was there and staying in one of those ratty Havana hotels where nothing kind of works. And I was returning to my room, and the elevator was full. It was a socialist elevator. And I had to get to the 8th floor. And the elevator was quite packed, and there was a woman in the elevator who was annoying because she said, "Hey Oliver, I want you to read my book. This new book, I just published it. It's about this guy, Jim Garrison, and you should know about it." And this was, those of you who remember her, Ellen Ray, who was the estimable publisher of Sheridan Press. Sheridan Square Press. Her husband, Bill Shapp, and Ellen Ray were quite legendary. They also put out Covert Action magazine at that time. Right, wonderful people. But she was a committed Jim Garrison. She'd been to the trial. She really believed in him. I didn't know much about it. I was like everybody else in the country. But she was really talking out loud, and I don't like to be approached in elevators where everybody's listening in. And she really got my nerves. So she said, "You got to read this book." I said, okay, just leave it at the desk. And indeed she did. I got off the elevator about half an hour later, it seemed. And I left her, thank God. She went down the other way of the hall. Never saw her again on that trip. But, damn it, I read her book finally, about within 2 years. I mean, I was very busy. I was starting another movie. I was in the Philippines. I went to Born on the 4th of July in the Philippines. And somewhere out there in the Philippines, I read it. And damn it, it was good. It was a real thriller. That's the way I saw it. I wasn't looking to the political aspect as much as the thriller aspect. I always wanted to make that kind of movie. And it was a great story about this guy who pursues this incredible story. And okay, I optioned it. And about two years later, I got around to actually doing something about it and going down to New Orleans and meeting Jim Garrison, who was some kind of unbelievable character, tall, 6'7", 6'6" at that time. He was old, but he was strong, and he was suspicious of everybody because he'd been through the mill. But he was ornery, but he was honest. I took an instant liking to him, but my questions were irritating him at times, and he was like thinking I was like one of them, one of those guys that had come like, what's his name, Walter Sheridan type, who was like trying to unmask him. And the truth was, I was really I had to question him hard. And this went on for a while, and he was worried. But I stick to what I want to. And I did a screenplay with Zach Sklar, who had been the editor of the book. And Zach and I banged it out. It was a hard script to make because it had so much information. But we wanted to do it in a way that it was like a John Dos Passos novel, if those of you remember. It was like bringing the documentary into a dramatic format. And I think we did some extraordinary things in the script. Kevin Costner came down, and it was a hell of a trip because there were so many people in New Orleans who either hated Jim, and those were the people who were kind of from the establishment, people from the newspaper business, media people, but those people who loved him. I cannot tell you what it's like to walk around the streets of the French Quarter, and everybody stopped, and it was a person with a good face, with a humble face, and talked to him. He was the DA, he was known as the guy. Big Jim. I particularly noticed that African American people really liked him a lot. So there was a sense that he was honest. I always got that sense from him. His staff, I talked to them eventually for the movie. Every one of those DAs and investigators loved him. So it was clear that he had built up a base in New Orleans. That was his town, and he was furious when he kept saying, this goddamn Carlos Marcello. I saw him one time in a restaurant, and they're trying to label me with this Carlos Marcello libel. You know, he's in another parish, Oliver. He's over in Jefferson Parish. We're in New Orleans Parish. Why don't they wake up? It has nothing to do with Carlos Marcello. But this rumor, of course, goes around. I met Pershing Gervais, those of you who remember him. Oh, yeah. All these corrupt people, I met every one of them. Harry Connick, I didn't. But corrupt people. And they're evil. They were evil people. And they knew Jim for many years. And of course, they all thought he was their friend. But they were ready to betray him. Anyway, long story, we made this very impossible movie. Partly because Warner Brothers said to me, this is great script, it's exciting, it's a suspense movie. That's who I sold it to, as a suspense movie along the lines of Z, the Z picture. Yeah, it's a great film. A Greek director, and Z was made about the Greek coup d'etat of 1967. And that's the way we did it. We did it like a tight, taut movie. At the same time, giving as much information as we could about it. Little did I know what I was in for. Little did I know. It was a very tough shoot, but Kevin Costner, as a movie star, and I had to convince Kevin to do the movie, and it took a lot of convincing, believe me. And his wife played a key role at that time because she wanted him to do something like this. He was known for, lighter fare. But when he came in, that made it a lot easier for us to make this film for the money that it took to make. I added a cast. I said, this film is so complicated, they're never going to follow it. But if we put faces for all these characters, like Jack Martin, Jack Lemmon, Ed Asner, John Candy, we'll spice this movie with people that take us into the movie so that we can know who is who as we go. So when David Ferry becomes Joe Pesci and so forth and so on. So it becomes fun. And that was what it had to be. It had to be fun. It had to be entertaining. And it's a hell of a story, but no matter how great the story, you still have to make it fun for the audience. And that's, of course, a big problem for people, as you know, who write political stuff, want to get their message out, but sometimes it's just so dull or so heavy-handed that you feel like, God, I'm going to be preached to. We couldn't do that. Another key character for me in my life was, who helped me a lot with the research, was Fletcher Prouty. Fletcher was, those of you, I'm sure you know who he is, was a military man, lieutenant colonel, who served as a liaison between the CIA and the military and the Air Force, and provided for many years the material, the hard-edged material that the CIA used in its operations abroad. So he knew a lot about the CIA. He knew Dulles very well. He used to brief him, and he knew those characters. And he quit government in 1963 or 4, I forgot exactly, after the assassination. He quit a lifetime of it because he smelled a rat. And he said it was all over the Pentagon. There was a smell. Something was wrong. People knew it. Fletcher was a great practical man. Donald Sutherland played him in the movie. I called the character Mr. X because a lot of what Donald Sutherland says in the movie basically comes from Fletcher or from Jim. Now Jim had already developed his CIA theory and Vietnam theory, as well as, the reason Kennedy was killed was the Cold War. And that was what Jim was saying all along. But Fletcher Prouty put flesh on it for me and made it more real by citing so many instances that he had known since World War II of the CIA doing these things abroad. And as you may know, it was really a shock to the audience to have a movie like this stop in the middle and have a 16-minute monologue with Donald Sutherland telling them, look, you guys, this is what's happened since World War II. Our country has gone completely corrupt. Even Costner goes like, what the hell am I in for here? And it's true. I have a feeling that Jim Garrison, I feel the same way when I see the old films of Jim, the documentaries. He had no idea where he was going, and it was so deep, the water. I faulted him in hindsight, because I think, Jim, that it was nerve-wracking, and you faced the biggest audience of all. They were out to kill you. And you said things like, I have solved the case for sure, the Kennedy assassination. You can't do that with the media. They'll roast you alive. But he had to maintain that bravado. He had to go after Clay Shaw. It was like the old man in the sea, like he had to get the fish, even if he dragged it back to shore, and it'd be eaten to death, there'd be bones left. It didn't matter. Jim had to stay in there for the run once he got in. And of course, he was offered bribes. You know, those of you who read the book, it's a great book. Tremendous bribes, and he was offered a federal judgeship, things that most people would have taken. He was warned. He was warned repeatedly not to do this. Little did he know. Anyway, Jim was one of the most courageous men I've ever met in my life, and I want to say that the rap he took. It's disgusting. It was disgusting. Our media, our establishment media, was terrible in what they did, and they never even examined the evidence that he was bringing forth, and it took so long for the trial. That's where this whole thing becomes doubly dangerous, because it becomes a bigger issue of a virus, where the media closes down any kind of truth, any kind of debate, any kind of expression of dissidence in this country. My God, Jim Garrison, all the charges. Now, he wasn't a saint. Maybe I painted him too much as one in the film, but you know, he did have an eye for the women and all this. I mean, he was a New Orleans guy. New Orleans people are like that. They're not like Washington people. They come from another world. So Jim is a patriot. Was a patriot in World War II. And he saw the bigger picture. What's amazing was, if now you look back at, for example, John Barber made a documentary recently. John Barber. I urge you to look at it. In it, Jim Garrison, the best of Jim Garrison is there in that documentary. You see him giving an interview where he's elegant, he's witty, he's cool. He hasn't been defeated. This is after the trial. But he's on top of it. He knows what happened. He doesn't back down an inch. He explains what happened, and he does it in very articulate terms. I urge you to look at the Barber documentary and any of those things on Jim Garrison. Barber loved him and did a great job of representing him. Fletcher Prouty said to me several things I remember. Of course, he talked about the NSAM, which nobody at that time when the film came out even knew about. I mean, the NSAM 263, which they said, you know, what's that? And they said I'd made it up, most of it or whatever. It wasn't true. I remember they were saying that it was a public relations stunt from Kennedy, but he never had any intention to withdraw. You know, that kind of stuff. That came from, you know, the people the usual suspects, including the New York Times. Arthur Gelb was Gelb, right? And Council of Foreign Relations. Yeah. So that's my first exposure to this kind of mendacity. But Fletcher said to me, don't fall for the scenery. The scenery. There's a lot of it in this. He said Oswald, for example, is scenery. It's a web that you don't want to go to because it's endless. In, out, you'll never get out of the Oswald thing. And some people have tried, and it's quite a story, as we know. Even up to this day, we're hearing new information about Oswald that's quite stunning. But Fletcher counseled me, stick to the why. Why was Kennedy killed? And this is the point that Donald Sullivan made in that scene. And that's what people forget. And I think those of us who stuck to the big picture and tried to explain that are doing a very important service for the younger generation. That it be remembered that Kennedy was different than any other president we've had since Roosevelt. He was different. And Fletcher said to me another thing, which I'll never forget. He said, this is, Oliver, when the film had come out now, we've gotten so much press and so many attacks. I think there was like 13 months of attacks, according to Jim Eugenio. 13 months of pressure. I've never been through something like that, because your movie comes out and you do a few rounds and you're out. Thank God. You have no idea what it's like to be defending that movie 5 months after. It was exhausting for me. And my credibility, the attacks to my reputation, my honor, it was very hard for me, and I wasn't used to it. So it leaves scars. It leaves scars. I don't think that my reputation in the business, in the film business, ever was recovered in its full sense of the word, that I was a filmmaker. I was always going to be judged from that point on as a political filmmaker, a conspiracy theorist, a derogatory word. And always there was some kind of shadow over my work in the future, no matter where I went.
Agreed.
So that was very disappointing in that regard, and I paid a price that I didn't see at the time. I was very proud of the film. It got an Academy Award nomination. And it actually made quite a bit of money for Warner Brothers, which is unbelievable. So very rarely do you have this kind of double success in the film world. But he said to me, "Oliver, you've created a tsunami. You don't see it yet." He was an older man. He said, "This thing will not go away. It will go on. It will grow." And I've always thought about that image that because I didn't know what a tsunami was, but he said. And frankly, we're here tonight, and look at, 30 years later? Yeah, almost 30 years. And what the hell? It's not going to go away. People stop me all over the world on streets and say, "I saw your movie, I love it," stuff like that. It's working, and some people say it woke my heart. It made me rethink everything. That kind of talk. And when you hear that from all people, old, young, it matters. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. I could go on and stuff, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Cyril. But the point I'm trying to make, I guess the bigger point, is that we created, I went to Congress, I testified, they actually were so embarrassed because they had to create the ARRB. They didn't want to. They didn't want anything. No congressional committee ever wants to review the history. They never do a job. They always come up with some orthodox conclusion. We knew that too. I can't say that I was really believing in what we're doing, but Frank Mankiewicz, who was helping us a lot, really believed it, and as did Steve Rivers. For Warner Brothers, it was a good publicity angle. That's what it was. Look, what about 2039 or whatever it was, 29? And that hooks people. I was amazed. It worked. So here's this congressional. Go ahead, open up the files, right? Of course, they never opened up all of them. You know what's going on. Trump the other day, last year was it? He delayed it for another how long? At the last second.
2 years.
Two more years. I mean, as Jim Kelly will tell you, or Bill Kelly will tell you, when this thing whenever the fish comes to shore, it'll all be bones, or else it'll be like a Mercedes left in Harlem, right? Which is stripped and unblocked somewhere, but it will still be the essence of the thing, but it won't be the thing. And I want to tell you that we're making a documentary as a result of that. The ARB came out in 98. 3 years, Jim, and it came out in 98, right?
The ARB closed down in 98.
They were closed down. Jim Tunheim told us that we should have gone on forever because we had so much, and there was no cooperation from the Secret Service, and so many CIA, of course, that we know about them. It's really impossible to get anything out of these arrogant organizations. Very hard. But there's always crumbs they leave for people like us. And the crumbs matter because people like Eugenio and Aguilar and Cyril here, they look at the crumbs and they see something that nobody else sees, and that's what we need. We need to pay attention to these things. So in hopes that I might do some good before I go, I'm trying to, as a legacy thing, I'm at my age, I'm going back now to the film 30 years, and saying, let's do a documentary and see what good the film did. Which is also self-serving, but it's also important because the media didn't cover anything that came out of New York. Nothing, they didn't give it any importance. But we will. And a lot of you have already in your work. I've seen it in the documentaries, and there's some very good stuff out there. And all these recent documentaries in the last 4 or 5 years have a lot of good stuff, and a lot of stuff still can come out. We're going to try to bring it all out that we know in this 2020. It'll come out in 2020 documentary, which is based. Jim DiEugenio is writing it, so we got to just try to be as technically correct as possible. It's complicated, 3 hours, and I can't tell you for sure it's going to come out in America because it should. But when I look around, I see a Japanese news crew is the only crew here that cares about this subject matter. It kind of tells you a lot about America. I have no hopes, and I have no hopes, and that's what's important. You're going to fight this battle without hopes. You don't do it thinking you're going to win. You fight to resist, because they will run you over. They always do. Power wins in that way. But if you fight, they can't win all. They will eventually lose. And the Soviet Union crumbled, so much to my surprise, in '91. There's no reason why the American empire, as corrupt as the Soviet Union was, if not more so, will not crumble in our lifetime. With it, hopefully will come some odds, because we have no history. We have no sense of history, as I tried to say in my Untold History of the United States. It's amazing. I tried to make a movie called Snowden. No support in this country. Snowden, as you know, was a whistleblower. They ignored him. It was difficult. We had to raise the money in Europe. Another thing I want to say before I go is just, in being here for 2 days, I see the disunity in this community, and it's an infighting of our community which are attacking each other. And I think the truth is really, it's evasive. There's a lot of things that are unknown. Those people who say that they know something like Jim did back then are wrong. There are a lot of questions, but one thing we all know in this community is that the intelligence and military elements and dishonorable men from our establishment on November '63 eliminated a reformer and installed a new kind of control of the government. And the media cooperate.
Always does.
And only by an act of hypnosis have they put the country to sleep like this. Our people are really dumb, or else asleep. Probably, I'm going to say hypnotized, because people don't believe they can make a difference. Because why should they? Can we stop a war? Can we debate our aggression in Ukraine, in Cuba, in Venezuela, Iran, Russia, China? No. It's closed down. The media tells us these are our enemies. They drive it in. You get brainwashed in this country. Should there be a military state costing $1 trillion a year, garrisoned around the world? There is no debate. Republican, Democrat makes no difference. The JFK community knows this because we've been there. We've never got the airtime. So two parties alternate in power in our phony documentary, in our phony democracy. We know the military security state we have is non-negotiable. We must bow down to it. But remember, Prouty was right. Jim Garrison was right. They're my heroes. The Soviets crumbled. We will crumble. The tide will turn. We may die. But the idea goes on. JFK will not die. Teach your children about this government. Teach them about JFK.